the glorification of your group, and therefore considering yourself righteous and entitled to hurt others indiscriminately because they all belong to a group that hurts yours. So collective narcissism actually creates this readiness for you in your head. So in other words, the whole literature about conflict escalation and radicalization to political violence talks about various motivations that can lead people this way, but it always says not everybody radicalizes, yeah? Not everybody goes through all of the steps. Well, collective narcissism, it is like you have a ticking bomb. If you're high on collective narcissism, you are a ticking bomb in a sense, potential. So whatever intergroup situation you find yourself, your mind will start spinning a story about the situation in such a way that you will see it in an antagonistic way, in which your group is always targeted by hostility of others. It's always threatened. You always have to defend it, and it's always deprived by others. So it automatically puts you into this mindset in which you have to fight for what is rightfully yours, and that, and also you justified in it. So not only it's antagonistic, but it's also always subjectively defensive. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Agnieszka, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Mia, for your invitation and your interest in my research.
So here in the States, we have a doctor we call kind of the narcissist doctor. There's a quote she said, narcissism can, if the first time you encounter a narcissistic person is in adulthood, it can sort of hijack your identity. It can really steal a person away from themselves. How would you describe narcissism on the individual level? First, before we get into collective.
Okay, well, it's not that such an easy task for scientists, to talk about narcissism because it's a very old concept in psychology. So it really dates back to Freud, and it's been since really intensely studied. So you have many different scientists of narcissism, and therefore you have very many different definitions. But I think actually the Freudian account of it is very interesting because it's metaphorical, and in a way it taps into the most crucial aspects of what narcissism is. So Freud uses a Greek myth to explain what narcissism is, and the myth has it that there's a beautiful boy who falls in love in his own reflection, and he is so taken by this reflection that he cannot move from the pond in which he sees himself, and so he's so preoccupied with his reflection that he cannot do anything else, just look at it. He's not interested in the world around him, in relationships. There's a nymph that is in love with him, but he's not less interested in the relationship with her. And he finally dies because there's nothing that preoccupies him more than his reflection. And I think the core of the narcissism is that preoccupation with how you are perceived or whether you are sufficiently admired by others. So this boy admires his beauty, and this is specific to narcissism, self-admiration, self-aggrandizement, right? So exaggeration of self-importance, but it's not enough. It's also related to the preoccupation how others receive my image. So I'm controlling my reflection. And that is actually related to the fact that it's never enough, the admiration that you have for others. So it's thirst to be admired. It's never satiated, really. And it's a lack of interest in the world around you, in yourself, really, because you're interested just in how you are received. And you are always aggravated, or you're always frustrated because the world never admires you enough. Yeah. So that's a sort of dynamic of individual narcissism. That's how I would see it, and that's how I would summarize various approaches to it.
I think I would get it's such a beautiful way to sum it up because it's basically like it almost is like you want the world to be obsessed with your image the way you are. And so
Mm.
some stuff she said it's kind of like a superficial empathy, and it's kind of like how you described so well there, where you care about the world to the point they care about you, your image. There's she said like deeply entitled, excessive need for admiration and validation from the external world. There's like no deep inner compass of guidance. It's all about behaviors that are going to get you admiration. Was kind of what she was describing. She gave up a lot, and she said it's a lot. So that's all just important because it kind of relates and gets into what collective of how collective narcissism is used. So can you talk to us about what collective narcissism is?
Right. In comparison to collective, maybe in contrast to individual narcissism, collective narcissism is a belief about a group we belong to. It's a narcissistic belief about this group. So again, we are interested in how the image of our group is received by others. Yeah. So
Ah,
I define it as a belief that your group is exceptional, but it is related also to a conviction that this exceptionality is not sufficiently recognized by others, right? So this preoccupation with others knowing that we are better than them, that we are entitled, special, and so on, it's very crucial to narcissism and collective narcissism. So in a way, you could talk about narcissistic needs for recognition. And in collective narcissism, this need is satisfied through social identity. So through the group you belong to. Yeah. So it's not through
yeah,
your beauty, it's not your your knowledge, it's not through your exceptional suffering, not through your exceptional empathy, whatever, but through your group's greatness. But again, like with any other narcissism, this greatness can be based on whatever, right? So it can be your group greatness because it enlightened the whole world. It can be the group greatness because it suffered uh, exceptionally within history. It can be because your group is dominant, has the best military, and can serve as a police of the world, and so on. Yeah. So various reasons can be used by group members to aggrandize the group and demand this special recognition, the group righteousness, higher
mm,
morality, yeah, whatever.
right,
And also important thing, it can be whatever group
yeah,
that you demand this recognition for. But we mostly research collective narcissism with reference to groups that have sort of social reified existence. So, people recognize them as social categories. So, like I would tell you, nation or gender are categories that there's no doubts what they signify to people.
right,
But if I tell you, harpsichord music lovers, it's a little bit fuzzy of a
yeah,
group. Yeah. So
yeah.
we measured collective narcissism with reference to made up groups, and it sort of has the same consequences, and the measurement is still valid, congruent, reliable, and so on. So what we want from psychological measurement, but really we want to make inferences of the consequences of collective narcissism with reference to groups that are consequential for our identity, yeah, that we share with a lot of people.
Gotcha. So would you say, okay, what's the difference between a collective narcissistic group and nationalism? Is it the same thing? Or
Well, so we would call it um, national collective narcissism or national
oh,
narcissism, right?
okay.
Um, and the other concept is nationalism. Now, it really depends who you ask. And again, it's like with the concept of narcissism. When you ask people, okay, what is nationalism? You will have various answers. Well, I happen to be a political psychologist, so I will come an answer coming from that literature and this research. But it might not necessarily be the answer that you will get from a sociologist or political scientist. But we define nationalism as this dominant stance in international relations. So it's the conviction that our nation should dominate others, and others should look up to our nation and should accept its guidance. Yeah. So you dominate by power, but also by example, by expertise, and so on. Yeah. You're that superior group. Now, we differentiate it from narcissism because national narcissism is preoccupied with lack of recognition. Yeah, and it monitors where this lack of recognition is lacking, and it is really aggravated and unhappy around that lack of recognition. And the recognition of the nation is never sufficient, you know. So in a way, you can always claim that the nation should be made great again, because you feel always deprived. You feel that someone else is appreciated, maybe another nation is appreciated better than yours, and so on. So in a sense, the dominance and the sort of leading role of a group is not so necessarily so central to narcissism. Is rather that sense of frustrated entitlement to special recognition that is central to it. So it is positively related to nationalism. And some people would even say that especially nowadays, nationalisms within a populistic, the ultra-conservative populism that sort of seems to be on the rise now, not seems to be, but is on the rise now worldwide, that nationalism is more like narcissism, although not everywhere. But in America, for example, it might be because what is proposed for American national identity now is not that we need to go and fight wars and win and guide the world towards betterment, but it's like we need to force the world to respect us as it used to, no? And that is a very narcissistic theme. So in a way, in some contexts, the two concepts might be really close to each other. But you have other nations in which the still nationalism is expressed through a tendency towards national dominance, no, of neighboring countries, for example, like in Russia, no? So it will depend how much you use national narcissism as a definition of what your nation should care about, no? So
Right.
I think in America now, nationalism can be coming close to, is rather, actually, no, America now has a theme of national narcissism rather than nationalism. That's how I would say. But, because people not necessarily differentiate national narcissism, but they still understand that there is something aggrandizing about how Americans want to, or how certain group of Americans want to see their group, no? I hope
I love
that
that.
answers your question.
Yes. So just for clarity for the audience. So basically what I'm getting from you, and I'm just going to take a swing at this. You're basically saying that nationalism or pride in one's country is not necessarily collective narcissism. Like I can be proud of the fact that America has free speech and certain things, and also America or any country wanting to dominate and and say, hey, we feel like our way of living or thinking about things is actually better for society, and doing things this way is better for women, for a lot of stuff. That type of nationalism is healthy. It can be perceived as, not, I won't say healthy, maybe that's a strong word, but it's not collective narcissism. Collective narcissism is when you start caring about lack. Like we lack respect. We lack perceived leadership in whatever. We're not where we should be. It's like a lacking. We lack recognition is when it kind of starts to creep into more of a collective narcissistic narrative, is
Actually, I think we need to introduce one more concept then,
okay.
because what you describe is patriotism. It would be under that concept.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's say, when you're scientist, you're really like preoccupied with
No, I was
precision.
supposed to ask you about I was supposed to include patriotism and
Yeah,
nationalism.
so
This is the
so like
nationalism.
we,
So
we
sorry.
pick things, like we divide
Yeah.
them carefully. So, but there is a method in it, because when we divide them so carefully, we can see what is related to what. And therefore, we can actually have some recommendation of how you can reduce collective narcissism or nationalism, right?
Okay.
So actually, the very first differentiation that you would have in this literature that had to do with a love for your own country would be this differentiation between patriotism and nationalism. And the idea would be that patriotism is love for your country without the demand that this country dominates the others, right? So what you were saying, I can be proud of my country because it has these achievements. I find it valuable. It satisfies me deeply to be a member of this country. So that would be in the area of the meaning of patriotism. My country should lead the others. My country is the most important, the strongest is the area of nationalism. And then we differentiate national narcissism, which is this area, my country is better than others and should be recognized as such, and it's not. Yeah. So in a way, it's in between patriotism and nationalism, and it shares with both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's only when we differentiate the three of them, we can say that collective narcissism is related to patriotism and nationalism, but patriotism and nationalism are not related to each other. Or actually, there is a negative relationship between them, not positive. And that's the addition. This is the contribution of collective narcissism literature, really, because people would say that we should not cultivate patriotism because it necessarily will lead to nationalism that is aggressive, militaristic, and so on. But actually, the collective narcissism literature shows that when you take collective narcissism out of patriotism, then patriotism is a remedy for nationalism. So it's this type of pride and satisfaction with your country that makes you understand that others feel the same for their countries. And it enables toleration, if not allyship or cooperation with others, because you understand where they're coming from in their loyalties to their nations. Yeah. So if
Right.
you
Right.
don't have these pretentious sort of expectations that everybody should think your group is the greatest, then you can actually truly understand them in their own, in the context of their own group memberships and loyalties.
Right. And I think it does get a little complicated because some people would argue that some things are obviously more beneficial sometimes than other things, generally speaking. So like just the laws around women in certain countries, there will be, some people that in countries like mine that'll say, well, it's better if women got more educated or had, better education systems, or it's better if I don't know, something that's less if people could um engage in free speech, for example, right? So this would be something that if you see, like, if, for example, if I see that as better, and if I'm in a group that sees that as better, is that collective narcissism?
Well, okay, well, we're getting out of the realm of that, because now you're talking about more general terms and we're moving to something that is in the realm of morality. You're talking about values. So you're talking about freedom and social justice as values, and you can obviously build collective narcissism around the fact that your country is fulfilling those values, realizing those values really well. But let me tell you, there is no country in the world that assured gender equality. So, hello, each country, each nation has lesson still to do in that topic. And this is actually where patriotism comes to play again, because with patriotism, really, it's this idea that your nation is good and it can be better. So you don't get what's the word? You don't get aggravated by criticism to your nation. If
Oh,
I tell you, look, even America,
yeah.
imagine,
No,
did
you're right.
not achieve racial and gender equality, not to mention racial, right? You don't get offended. You think, it didn't. Actually, like
Yeah,
when you look at objective and statistical data, therefore, it has something like we can still better it. So what can we do for it to be better? Yeah.
I
So in patriotism, you have that strive for betterment of the nation, so everybody is happy in it. Yeah. So it is like it is satisfying for you to be a member of this nation. You want everybody to feel so satisfied. So it's also inclusive. When you look at collective narcissism, it's very exclusive. It looks at, okay, who fulfills the definition of true nation. And
got
it makes this so it's very status sort of oriented. It has to be the best, and it excludes a lot of groups that are not basically satisfied what is prototypical for the nation, which is very much defined by the groups that are dominant within the nation. Speaking of
beautiful.
genders, for example.
I gotcha. I gotcha. So what got before we get into the study, what got you interested in studying this anyways to begin with?
What got me interested in studying collective narcissism?
Yeah.
I have been interested in studying the dynamics of intergroup conflicts. Yeah. And that has sort of personal reasons, no, because I lived through the country that was very strongly divided, and then got together and sorted the differences, changed the political system. I'm Polish, right? So I observed that when I was growing up, and I was very much impressed by by various aspects of living in a divided country and then living in a country that came together. And I was interested in mechanisms of conflict escalation and how our thinking completely changes when we are in the midst of escalating conflict. So, like when you take when you take a person from outside the conflict and
Yeah.
put them in a conflict, they would think the people who are there in the conflict are completely crazy. Like their understanding of reality is very biased, is skewed, more or less is identical. It's just sort of the mirror image.
Yeah.
So I hate their group, they're terrible, but they hate my group with the same passion, and they think the same terrible things about that I think about them. They think about my group, right? So like for a person from outside it, it's like, what? You people are clearly biased. But in a conflict, that absolutely has an adaptive logic. You have to believe it, because what you do in conflict is you usually harm other people. So you have to explain this to yourself why you do that and still stay a good person. So that's what I was interested in. And I researched various incentives to creation of this sort of antagonistic mindset, this black and white perceptions in conflicting sides. And collective narcissism is actually an individual difference variable, so that creates predispositions to set up this antagonistic mindset. Yeah, so it is like you have a ticking bomb. If you're high on collective narcissism, you are a ticking bomb in a sense, potential. So whatever intergroup situation you find yourself, your mind will start spinning a story about the situation in such a way that you will see it in an antagonistic way, in which your group is always targeted by hostility of others. It's always
Ah,
threatened. You always have to defend it, and it's always deprived by others. So it automatically puts you into this mindset in which you have to fight for what is rightfully yours, and that, and also you justified in it. So not only it's antagonistic, but it's also always subjectively defensive. Yeah, you have good reasons to demand this recognition from others, and you have good reasons to punish them, no, because they don't grant you what you need, and also they conspire against you, they're hostile against you. So you start spinning those stories. In this sense, collective narcissism is an aspect of how you identify with a group that is important to you, how you evaluate it, and it works very strongly as a motivated social cognition. So it motivates your information processing, your cognition about the group. Yeah. So it's related with a lot of the, bias that makes you eventually perceive your group as all moral, always right, righteous, invincible, and yeah, entitled to hurt others.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask you how is collective narcissism useful, but that's how. It gets you to justify why, and you could feel like you're a good person. As a matter of fact, you're good for being in the group and defending the group, right? It
No,
can
yeah,
that
absolutely, absolutely. So I was recently asked actually to write a chapter about what can be said about collective narcissism in the context of terrorism, and not, like now the terrorism differs very much in the OECD democratic developed countries and non-developed ones, where in democratic countries now the biggest threat comes from domestic terrorism that is motivated by ultra-conservative ideology. And actually, but the mechanism to this type of terrorism, and the terrorism that we know in other countries that is motivated more by escalating violence, or the previous threat of Islamist terrorism, it would have sort of the same mechanism behind it. Yeah, the glorification of your group, and therefore considering yourself righteous and entitled to hurt others indiscriminately, because they all belong to a group that hurts yours. So collective narcissism actually creates this readiness for you in your head. So in other words, the whole literature about conflict escalation and radicalization to political violence talks about various motivations that can lead people this way, but it always says not everybody radicalizes. Yeah.
mm,
Not everybody goes through all of the steps. Well,
right.
collective narcissists do. This is the
Ah,
individual difference variable that helps you sort of pinpoint who is likely. Yeah.
gotcha, gotcha. And I don't know if you would know, but if any historical context, like, is this something that most you would think probably started many wars? This kind of
Well, yes, no, but absolutely. Well, so here's the thing. I think it's adaptive, right? Because we live in coalitions, and those coalitions fight sometimes against each other for resources that help them survive. So obviously, those sort of belligerent attitudes brewing in a group um, are eventually adaptive when a group has to fight, but they are very maladaptive when that is not necessary. Yeah.
right.
And in a larger scale, it's always more beneficial for groups and societies to coordinate and collaborate. So that sort of tendencies might be destructive for groups. So when they spin out too much, they are destructive. So actually, we speak about collective narcissism. It's important to say when the first time this concept was actually articulated as group narcissism in the writings of Erich Fromm, and collective narcissism in writings of Theodor Adorno. And those are scholars from Frankfurt School, which was the school originated in Frankfurt, right? Social
Mhm.
scientist, German, but of Jewish origin. And they were investigating the attitudes in Germany in 30s. And that's where they first started formulating, sort of naming what was going on in a society that was then polarized and then was escalating towards the extreme prejudice, and that finally enabled Holocaust. So that really all that social experience really inspired the investigations of social and political psychologists trying to answer the questions how it was possible. And this is when those scientists started labeling the national sentiment that was building up within Germany, and labeling it collective narcissism. So yes, that if a group accepts that this is the best way of expressing its identity, that's really dangerous, because this is a belligerent group. You know, belligerent individuals, well, they can be problems, but they can be also marginalized. Their role in a group can be marginalized. So that attitude does not become normative for a group, expected of every member of the group. But when we decide, okay, that's what represents us as a nation the best, then we have a belligerent nation. Yeah.
Mm.
So a really important area of study is to really study how people and groups move from what I described as patriotism to national narcissism and back, within individuals, but also within groups.
Right. I know you're gonna study that.
I won't study that. I'm applying for money.
Okay.
So because you see, like, this is the predicament. I described something that is individual difference variable that predisposes people to radicalization towards political violence. It's an individual difference variable. By definition, it's stable. It does not change that much. But now I'm interested in neutralizing it.
Right.
So I need to now conceptualize it in such a way that allows me to study how it changes, right? So I have to change my methods. I have to change my approach. And that's what I'm looking forward to do that. Because I totally believe that those evaluative states, like patriotism, collective narcissism, those can be conceived as states also. They can be brought up by situations, yeah? And just people stabilize in one or the other. This is actually, by the way, how we tend to think about individual narcissism as well. No, there's so science now of narcissism differentiates between grandiose narcissism and vulnerable narcissism.
Yeah.
Don't know whether you talked about it with your doctor, but there are these forms of narcissism in which you just agentic, dominant, believing in yourself, grandiose, or frustrated, withdrawn, really bitter about lack of recognition. And you fluctuate from grandiose to vulnerable depending on how world affords that grandiosity. If you are
Yep.
totally frustrated in your need for recognition, you become vulnerable narcissism. If people say, yeah, you're great, then you feel, yeah, you're satisfied, you express more grandiosity. So I think something similar might be happening on a social level of the self between patriotism and collective narcissism. So groups can move that way, and individuals can move within a range.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let's talk about one of your studies where you did I looked at the paper because you've done a few.
Yeah, I've done quite a few. So it would be, yeah, tell me which one you would like to talk about particularly.
Let's see. Which one what it is okay, so let's do one more because
Okay, so which paper was that? Collective narcissism and its social consequences? Yeah, well, I can tell you, right. So one piece of research that we've done was with a colleague of mine, Professor Chris Federico, where we looked at precisely the concepts that we talked about earlier: patriotism, national narcissism, and nationalism. And that I thought maybe this is why you contacted me and you were interested in this paper. And we measured on nationally representative samples, we measured those three concepts and we looked at how they were related. And this is where I told you, when you take collective narcissism into account, you can actually discover a negative association between patriotism and nationalism. So patriotism excludes nationalism, not brings the possibility of nationalism. So that would be one interesting paper. It's important to me because also this paper, like many others before, show that patriotism and collective narcissism, national collective narcissism, are positively related. So basically, what I always say is the collective narcissism is an aspect of in-group identification, especially the evaluative aspect of in-group identification. So where we think, are motivated to think and evaluate our group positively, yeah? Mm-hmm. But, you know, similarly to self-esteem and narcissism, we can think positively about ourselves, but also exaggerate our self-importance, as in narcissism. Yes. So same with groups. We can think about them positively, like with patriotism, but also exaggerate their importance and the need for their recognition, like with collective narcissism. Nevertheless, both of those variables, patriotism and national narcissism, have positive evaluation of the nation in common, and they assume that the nation is important, right? So actually, you can build on this common core to move collective narcissists more towards patriotism when you emphasize the importance of the group, the group's achievements, the satisfaction of members of the group being in this group. When you can stress that aspect, it is also important to collective narcissists. So that can focus them more on the positive aspect of belonging to the group rather than the fact that it is not recognized as much as they would want it. Yeah. So that is one of the ways that you can capitalize on the overlap between patriotism and national narcissism to reduce national narcissism. There is another line of research that we did that talks, that I told you that there is we come sort of we in our conversation from individual narcissism, collective narcissism. No, we sort of talk about this level of individual, level of the group. Now, can we talk about how those two are related? Yeah, yes. Because that is also an important question. And actually, it's not very well explored. But the proposition that that comes from the very classic understanding of collective narcissism, the one that comes from the Frankfurt School scholars that I mentioned to you from Germany, was that collective narcissism is an exaggeration of importance of the group that compensates for ego weaknesses. So Adorno would say that collective narcissists see in group what they would like to see in themselves. Right. So they are very acutely, painfully aware that they like certain aspects of grandiosity, and therefore they want their group to fulfill that recognition of this grandiosity need for them. So we researched how collective narcissism is related to aspects of psychological well-being, emotional regulations, mental health. And actually, the research shows that here the differentiation between narcissistic and non-narcissistic love for the group, whether it's a nation or any other group, is very important, because patriots are emotionally stable, mature individuals, while collective narcissists are the opposite, right? Yeah. So they are dysregulated. So especially they have deficits in regulating negative emotions. So they would have rather negative than positive self-esteem. They would also express negative emotions, lack of positive emotions. They would express lack of social connectedness. Yes, so they would definitely have deficits in trust and an ability to build trustful and good, well, how would you say, good relationships with others, right? So they're kind of volatile emotionally, and with a lot of sensitivity to rejection, sensitivity to negative stimuli, and inability to solve. Like we all, of course, experience negative things in our lives, but the maturity and emotional stability and resilience have to do with the ability to calm down, withdraw, rebuild, no? And that is impaired in collective narcissists. So there was a recent study that we published in a journal called Psychological Science, in which we show that when we assist people in this ability to positively regulate the emotions, then that reduces the link between collective narcissism and prejudice and outgroup hostility. So we actually did this via the means of mindfulness. It's an ability to withdraw emotional reactions, the immediate reactions to the experience, and people differ with it, but you can also teach people to be more mindful. Yeah, so like focus their attention, manage their attention, focus their attention on their emotions and what they do with their emotions, get more agency in how they regulate emotions. So we did experimental studies in which we taught people to meditate and to learn to withdraw emotional actions immediately, to think about, change the emotional reactions and so on. And we particularly asked them to focus on exercising the feeling of gratitude. Yeah. But gratitude in a very broad sense, like for the fact that, you exist and the life around you exists and so on. And after 6 weeks of a training, of mindfulness training like that, we reduced the link between collective narcissism and 6 different types of prejudice that we measured. So it was a very reliable effect. The training worked to increase gratitude and prosocial emotions, and it also worked to decrease the link between collective narcissism and hostility in form of prejudice. So in a sense, at least now we know that by strengthening ego, we can at least switch off the hostility of collective narcissists. Yeah. So in other words, you would not necessarily make this connection, but caring of the society's mental health is also caring of democracy. Yeah, because by making people more happy and more able to regulate their emotions, then you make them also more happy citizens and more likely to be inclusive and collaborative in their social endeavors, which is important, obviously, for democratic systems. So in that actually has that consequence that the mental health crisis that we're experiencing now, it has profound consequences, and it might be related to the democratic backsliding that we are also experiencing. So the money should be put there, and especially in prevention and education, psychological education in general population, really, how to deal with your own emotionality. So that would be one important aspect that comes from my studies, I would say.
So how did you find who was more prone to engage in collective narcissism for the study? How did you guys find the participants?
Well, okay, so as I said, collective narcissism is an individual difference variable, so that's what we did. We tested people with a collective narcissism scale to see how high they score on that measure, yeah, and then we used that measure as a correlational analysis, no? So we checked whether the training had an effect, and whether its effect was stronger on higher levels of collective narcissism. Yeah, so that's what we found, and that's what you would typically do in this sort of research. But sometimes we had another set of research that we divided people into two groups based on their levels of collective narcissism. So we had a big group of participants who we administered the collective narcissism scale to, and then we took the bottom 25% as a low collective narcissism and top 25% as a high collective narcissism, and we compared how those two groups reacted to witnessing the exclusion of their group, to find out that the reaction among high collective narcissism group was that much stronger reaction of distress, while in low collective narcissism, that reaction did not show.
Could you talk a little bit about collective narcissism and conspiracy theories? How do they, is that a common, something you see in collective narcissistic groups? Is it conspiracy theories
Well,
theme?
as I said before, it's difficult for me to talk about collective narcissistic groups because we really don't have a good measurement of how groups could be narcissistic, no? You would expect that as a trait, this trait is normally distributed in a population, so that means that mostly people are in the middle. But you could talk about, so like some of my colleagues, for example, would analyze the language and expressions about social identity specific for a group to talk about how this group builds their identity. So for example, a colleague of mine, Teresa Capellos, and her collaborators, they analyzed the manifestos of terrorist supremacists, terrorists, right? The people who committed terrorist acts and then published manifestos for traces of collective narcissism, and they would find that there is this idea of lack of recognition for the special chosen group that is very present there. So in that sense, you can talk about maybe a group expressing narcissistic identity. Sorry, I forgot what your question was.
No, it was just conspiracy theories and
oh yeah, conspiracy theories. Okay, so in that sense, like I wanted to make this disclaimer that I don't know how to measure necessarily reliably that the group is narcissistic. I can infer that the group becomes narcissistic because it wants to describe itself in members describe it in this way. But there is definitely a link between individual collective narcissism, so like I can score high or low on that scale, and a tendency to endorse conspiracy theories. So people who, especially when it comes to national collective narcissism, I think there's maybe one study that measured religious collective narcissism and in relationship to conspiracy theories. Most other studies would be national narcissism, and we find a really reliable relationship. So it's always positive, and it doesn't seem to be it doesn't seem to matter that much what is the content of conspiracy theories. Collective narcissists just basically like have a predilection to believe in the stories that their groups members are spinning. But specifically, there is a stronger relationship between collective narcissism and the stories about enemies of my group. So I told you before that this is the collective narcissism creates this predisposition to find enemies, to position yourself and your group antagonistically to some other group. So when this other group is not immediately available, you create it. So collective narcissism is related to hypersensitivity to intergroup threat, to exaggeration of insult and criticism to a group. So things that would not occur to you as a need, like to other people, this is not an insult, but it would be, collective narcissist would consider this insulting. Like naming a bear Muhammad. It was a famous situation years ago with an English teacher. So they also would make up enemies, where they would make up those stories about secretive plots of people with hostile relationship, with hostile intention towards them, and that way, they would come up with these enemies from which they have to protect their group and towards which they have to be vigilant. So that story spinning is particularly effective to also explain to collective narcissists. Do you build up this justification for intergroup violence? But they generally are prone to believe what other members of their group believes. So they're not rational in that sense. And they are now, for example, they pick up trends. So science skepticism is another thing. They don't want to believe in scientific method, in logic, evidence, experts, yeah? And it's because they prefer suspension of reality for the sake of acceptance of beliefs that are important for the group, right? So anything that I will talk to you as a scientist, and I say, we have actually a method that helps you discern what's a belief and what has some empirical funding. That's threatening, no? Because I can just confirm what you would like to dearly believe in, yeah? So that's why collective narcissists find science threatening, unless they can say, because of that science, by nation or whatever, yeah?
They have a complicated relationship with science.
So in other words, they're kind of volatile, you cannot expect that the relationship would always present itself in exactly the same way, because it will depend what is a function of that second belief for the collective narcissism at a given moment. Yeah.
It's kind of like they say with individual narcissism. They'll change. They can change. They're adaptable. So they can be very nice to the boss because the motive and what they're trying to optimize for is different. But when they get home, they can be very angry and upset and like, why didn't you do the dishes, or why didn't you recognize this? Whatever. It just depends. They switch. They can switch. But can individuals who are not necessarily narcissistic get pulled in and sucked into collective narcissism and not realize, or is it harder?
So the relationship between individual narcissism and collective narcissism is not strong at all. I mean, it's positive, but it is not strong. There's also a negative relationship between self-esteem and collective narcissism, right? So complicated here, narcissistic but low self-esteem, so like more like vulnerable narcissism. You can be collectively narcissistic without being narcissistic, because then you believe those things about your group. Yeah. So there might be other processes here at stake. It might be because you value things like group loyalty, cohesiveness, obedience to authority. So there are some people who are more predisposed towards this sort of social life than others. And for them, that believing that the group is like that is important, no? And also, this is going to be a complex relationship because, like ego weakness, compensation on a group level, no? So there should be a complication here. It's not because I'm narcissistic, I'm collectively narcissistic. I have deficits, therefore I'm narcissistic, collectively narcissistic. Yeah.
And like you were tapping on before, I guess I didn't directly ask you the question, but the traits of a collective narcissism really includes just fundamentally like your inner group it deserves more. They're not getting what they deserve. There's a lot of hostility. They have to create an outgroup, and the outgroup is the reason why we are where we are. Is the
So basically,
and they're very sensitive to criticism. They're very sensitive to objective criticism or things that some other person would be like, that's an okay criticism, but a normal person or
they're sensitive, oversensitive to criticism. They also find it offensive. Like not only that, even in the situations in which they can expect sort of feedback that is not always positive, the presence of negative feedback offends them. and they take it as something that they should avenge. Yeah. But I wanted to also tell you something about the volatility, about the relationships of collective narcissism with others, with other things like conspiracy theories, yes, but then sometimes that relationship might not exist, depends on the content, or might not be as strong. We also found that collective narcissism is related to a tendency to support violent political leaders. So those leaders who would justify the need to fight with other groups and destroy. And it does not matter what political ideology stands behind it. So we found, for example, that collective narcissism is related to a variable known in psychology as authoritarianism, which stands for a tendency to follow strong leaders, but it's mostly conceptualized as right-wing authoritarianism, which means that it also brings together this tendency to follow strong leaders, social conventions, tradition, and aggress towards all those who do not follow leaders, who do not follow conventions, who are dissenters. But we also found that collective narcissism is related to another concept, very like a mirror image of right-wing authoritarianism, that is called the left-wing authoritarianism. It is a variable that is quite contested and controversial in political psychology. It's been recently conceptualized and measured as a preference for leaders who lead to destruction of established hierarchies, right? Right? So in other words, it's a sort of anti-establishment aggression that these leaders are for, advocating for. And collective narcissists are also swayed towards those leaders as well. So collective narcissism is simultaneously related to right-wing and left-wing authoritarianism. Basically, what stays is obedience towards ruthless, violent leaders, regardless of which way the ideological dimension goes. And also, collective narcissism is related to another variable that is called need for chaos. Chaos? I never know how to pronounce it. Chaos and distraction, like SCHOAS, no? Or something. Whatever. Distraction and disturbance. So it's a need to see the world burn, as the authors of this concept say. And there is a collective narcissists have that proclivity. They sort of feel, okay, violence for the sake of violence is also good. You know?
I'm so happy you mentioned that, because I was going to bring that up, but there's collective narcissism on the left and the right. You can, at least in America, you can see.
I wouldn't be too symmetrical about it, okay? I wouldn't be too symmetrical about it. I think there is, because collective narcissists are also for hierarchies. They're all for being better, yeah? So what suits them is, like, if they are in the groups that are dominant, right? It suits them. And they would rather preserve those hierarchies. But if they're in groups that are not dominant, then they would be more revolutionary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
but there will be this particular type of revolutionaries that want to flip the hierarchies, not the ones that fight for social justice. Yeah. There would be ones that want my group on top now.
Yeah. Okay. It's big. How do you think, I know you are very big on data, but what do you think about social media and this collective narcissism phenom? Do you think that social media has contributed to it? I don't know if you looked at anything. Maybe
it depends. It depends in what sense. So, if you think about it as a belief, right? So it's a belief about your group. So you believe that what you are, what is important to your identity, is not recognized by others, is not valued enough. And then you find others that actually say, yeah, you know, I feel the same way. We should be more recognized, people like us. And these people like us might be various things, but as I said in the beginning, there are certain categories that yield themselves easier. So mostly my national group, right? That's the one that is quite salient in most people's mind. But it can be my racial group. Yeah, whites are particularly endangered now, no? Is as the story goes. So, or men, right?
Now,
Yeah. So you can find like-minded people much more easy when you have a tool, yeah,
yeah,
of social media, because you don't have to go to your pub, you don't have to go wherever you meet people physically. You can just go to your computer and see whether like there are other like-minded people. And if you find like-minded people, that gives an incredible boost to your belief. Yeah, you become validated in this belief, strengthened, and you can start building a community around this belief. So it spreads much faster, and it might happen much faster than this particular belief becomes normative for a group. So if you want to be a member of this group, you have to believe it.
right,
Yeah. And who
right,
does not want to be a member of their nation? Yeah. Okay,
exactly,
if my nation is collectively narcissistic, then I have to express this belief, and either I start believing it, or I at least start expressing it on the surface, so I'm included. Yeah. So it requires a certain strength of ego actually to say, no, I don't want my group to be defined this way, and start the current to sort of argue away from that definition. But in that sense, social media can also help, right? Because
right.
then you can start working to sway the definition in another direction. You just have to find a will and zeal to do it.
Let me ask you just this last question before I let you go. What are some things that you how can you tell? Let's say you're in a movement, you're in a group, and it is for a good cause. How could you start to realize, or how do you know when it's going in a more collective, narcissistic path, and it's not necessary. We don't need war right now. It's not a, how do you know? What are some signs where you're like, okay, um, this is getting hijacked a little bit.
Well, it's so basically what really matters in that context is leaders, yeah, opinion leaders. Um, so leaders are entrepreneurs of identity. They propose a certain understanding of what my group is about, what are the valid goals of this group. And when you have a social movement, you don't have one leader, you have different leaders. You can have more pronounced leaders, but
Right.
you will have various sort of streams within a social movement. It can be all for, let's say, gender equality. But then you listen to what those various opinion leaders says. And some of them would be more belligerent than others. And those belligerent ones, they would march, arm to arm with those who say, we need justice, we need equality. They
Right.
would say, no, we need women to rule for now. you know,
Right.
but they would still march for equality. Now, the question is, if you have a social movement, what leaders matter more within the social movement? And when you have a movement that gives more presence and exposure to belligerent leaders, then you will have that movement, first of all, using more of a violent methods of engaging in political fight, using more aggressive language and more condemning language towards the outgroup that is seen as a problem,
Ah,
that would prepare a field to hurting this group, justifying hurting this group to reverse the hierarchy. Now, in the social movements that actually fight for social justice, you will have actually quite active and explicit marginalization of the belligerents. You would not want to switch it off completely, because you need a little bit of disruptive action in your movement.
Right.
But you have to really be careful at the tipping, not to reach a tipping point. You have to have it under control, because if it tips, it can just completely change over the nature of the movement.
Gotcha. Yeah, you need some spice, but not too much. Yeah, because there were many movements that did lead to change, good change, that probably had some variable of this, some variants of this to some extent. And so
Yeah, there is another very complex area that collective narcissism is very applicable to, which is the collective action and social change. But we only recently started applying this perspective to our understanding of this area. So we don't know that much yet. We know a lot about collective narcissism on national level, that I would say, in intergroup conflicts, but much less in asymmetrical relationships. So when you have dominant and dominated groups
there we go.
within a nation. So like you have to take all of those levels into consideration.
Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it was pleasure talking to you. It's very inspiring to actually, like have to formulate the answers to those questions. And yeah, I like that, because that advances my thinking, and there's nothing more important for a person who does research to see that it resonates, that it answers questions, that it provides people with language to articulate things for themselves.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Definitely
Mia.
do it again. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
You got me. Okay. Thank you.
All right, lovely.
Lovely, lovely.